As Memorial Day approaches here in the U.S., the men and women who gave what Abraham Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion are honored. My next guest has been a soldier and is now a builder of leaders. He served with distinction in the U.S. Army Special Forces. He's a graduate of West Point. He's also chairman of the St. Sebastien Institute, a new organization that applies the wisdom of the military to priests in the Catholic Church. Please welcome U.S. Army Reserve's Lieutenant Colonel Mike Erwin to the program. Lieutenant Erwin, thank you for being here. Memorial Day began as a decoration day, a solemn observance to honor the Union dead after the Civil War. And yet today, for too many Americans, I don't have to tell you this, Colonel, it's merely a three-day weekend. As a soldier, what is lost when we reduce the day to just a holiday and we fail to understand the memorial part?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Really great to be here. And I love talking about this topic of Memorial Day. It's something that's obviously very personal to me. I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 3 times between 2004 and 2009. And the biggest thing that's lost is, we lose the personal connection that there are so many Americans who have lost a loved one, a brother, a son, a daughter, a close personal friend, and that this Memorial Day weekend it's probably the most powerful weekend of the year for them. So there's the personal aspect of it. And I think as a nation, sometimes we forget all of the men and women who have given their lives in defense of freedom over the past 250 years. And that the freedoms that we enjoy didn't just happen. They didn't just fall into our lap. There are people who paid with their lives with them. And I think that's a huge part, something that we lose when we forget really the meaning and the purpose of Memorial Day.
Yeah, there's a tradition in the church and the military of the priest chaplain, the man who goes where the soldier goes, who brings the sacraments into the darkness of combat. Men like Father Emile Capon, whose cause for sainthood has progressed, Father Vincent Capodanno, who received the Medal of Honor, and many others. Lieutenant Erwin, what is it that a chaplain provides that no other figure can provide to a soldier in those extreme moments of need?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are such a pivotal member of an organization, especially in a combat rotation. I remember my chaplains, that I had when I was in 2-7 Cav and 3rd Special Forces Group. And, they provide everything from when you're back in garrison, counseling and direction about how to order your life properly, to the most trying times, which, Father Capodanno, I actually co-founded a high school, named after him, Capodanno High, here right outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So I got to know his story really deeply over the past 7 or 8 years. The most extreme example is running around the battlefield administering last rites to dying Marines. That's what he did before he eventually was killed in action. And as you just mentioned, Raymond, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in recognition of his bravery. But so it's everything from the support of how to order your life through the most painful, challenging moments of your life in a combat zone where priests may be called upon to administer those last rites.
I want to talk about your work with the St. Sebastien Institute, which draws directly on special operations training, at least the methods, and it applies them to priests and their work in parishes. Lieutenant Colonel Erwin, how did you and your colleagues come up with the realization that this kind of support and training was needed? And what is the gap in priestly formation that St. Sebastien Institute is designed to fill?
Absolutely. So, we're in our first year here. So we've got actually someone who was a cadet at West Point when I was a teacher back there, Major Louis Taberky. And he just sort of sua sponte made this happen, last summer. But he and I had talked about this. Numerous people, I think, had conversations, with him over the time. And that is how complicated and how challenging it is to be a priest, especially in the world today, in the information age, with the accessibility, with all the information, with all the noise. Not only are you ultimately responsible for all of your parishioners' souls, right? But you have got a full-time staff, often a small team. You've got a part-time staff, and then you have the ministry leaders who are what I would just kind of call super volunteers. And then you have just the entire parish. Think about the challenges, that you face when you're leading that many people. And when you think about West Point, for example, and that's where Louis and I both attended. We take 4 years to learn leadership at a young age, to be prepared, to be able to lead potentially in a combat zone, but if not, still just leading young men and women. And so this is the very intentional effort and process that the military applies to developing leaders, because we know how critically important it is to get that training. And, so we just, as we talked to more and more priests, we heard, over and over again of like, boy, I could really benefit from some more leadership development training. And so that's a lot of what we're doing. We're bringing a lot of the principles from the military that the military's honed and developed over hundreds of years about how to lead. Obviously, a lot of them transfer and some of them don't, but we're spending time in conversations with priests. And then more importantly than just the conversations and the intellectual work of what does it mean to lead is the experiential part. And this is where, Louis, who is, a Green Beret, has taken a lot of the principles from Robin Sage, which is the culminating exercise that, a soldier participates in before earning that Green Beret. And we have the pastor stress test. We have different things where they are practicing leadership in real time to really supplement the intellectual leadership development that they get from the classroom setting with us, where we're engaging with them on how to lead themselves first, how to lead other people, how to lead teams, starting with an understanding of why is leadership so complicated in the world today?
I always say, Lieutenant Colonel, and I've said this for years, probably decades now, every young man in seminary should have to be a chaplain for a limited amount of time, because I think it teaches you, just hanging out with groups of Marines or firemen, there's a fraternity and a brotherhood that really is only taught in that surrounding that I don't think they get in seminary. Tell me how the St. Sebastien Institute reaches out to priests to perhaps inspire them to become chaplains and maybe to fulfill this long-held wish that I've personally had for our priests.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. The idea of taking a young man, who's been formed and developed, and obviously the church does such a great job, in the seminaries with the formation and understanding salvation history and the history of the Catholic Church and all that, which is so important. But there's also this idea of the fraternity and the relating to people. They're going to have to do in their parishes. And look, some people are natural at that. They have a gift. God has blessed them with the ability to do that naturally. But the reality is, for a lot of people, to include a lot of us who go to West Point, this has to be learned. It's a skill set that needs to be learned and practiced and honed before you get into a combat zone or before you get handed the keys to a parish. And so I absolutely agree, with what you said. A big part of what we do, because Archbishop Broglio has really blessed our efforts, and is a big believer in what we're doing. We know that there are a lot of priests, a lot of young men who actually would make great chaplains.
Yep.
And they would make people who would serve, great in the military. It doesn't mean that you need to do it for a full career, but part of this is to expose more young men and more priests to what the military is, and if it might be something that they might want to do with at least, again, a part of their priesthood. It doesn't mean that you need to do it for, your full life.
I have seen it. I'm sure you have too. I've seen it in action. Former chaplains. Father Jerry Murray, who's often on this show, was just on earlier. Father Jerry was a Navy chaplain. A dear friend of mine, Father Jim Gould in Virginia, another amazing priest, one of the best recruitment leaders in the Arlington Diocese when they were ordaining 19 and 20 guys a year. Father Jim Gould, also a chaplain. There is something taught in the fraternity of men, and that warrior spirit, doesn't mean killer, but it's a warrior spirit of defending what's right that carries and bleeds over into their priesthood, which benefits everybody. So, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Erwin, I thank you for what you're doing. We will leave it there. Thank you for your service. And for more information on the work of St. Sebastien Institute and how you can help, visit stsebastianinstitute.org.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.